You'll never leave where you are until you decide where you'd rather be. My question this morning is, when is the last time you felt lost? You know, sometimes when I'm in a big place with lots of possible directions to go, I can feel a little overwhelmed and I feel lost. And you might even be feeling that way after this long summer of so many topics to consider for your life, and maybe you have other personal reasons going on that you might be feeling a little lost even right now this morning. So today I want to start with a poem by David Wagner called Lost, from the Native American tradition of the Pacific Northwest, and it reads this: Lost. Stand still. The trees ahead and bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here, and you must treat it as a powerful stranger. You must ask permission to know it and be known. The forest breathes. Listen. It answers, I have made this place around you. If you leave it, you may come back again, saying, here. No two trees are the same to raven. No two branches are the same to wren. If what a bush or a tree does is lost on you, you are surely lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. So the forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. I love that line. So what's the forest? If the forest is life itself, the forest is divine intelligence, the forest is God, life knows where you are. You must let it find you. It's pretty powerful, right? Being lost. One time I remember being in an amusement park. And when my daughter and I came out of a ride, nothing looked familiar. You know how they put you on in one place in the park and you ride this ride and you come out the other side, you don't know where the heck you are? It felt so disorienting, and obviously we're still in the park, so we're not really lost, but the paths leading away from where we stood were all unfamiliar. You know, there were souvenir shops in one direction, snack trucks in another direction, and the road ahead seemed kind of like lead to a lake or something. Like, which way do we go? And what was so disorienting is people were walking confidently in every direction we could say. Like, they didn't seem lost, but we kind of felt lost. And sometimes I feel that way in a hotel. It's a joke that I never know which way to the elevator. I come out of the room and I have no idea. But also in a big shopping mall, you know, you come out of one shop and you're like, I have no idea which direction I came in. I don't know where my car is. Where do I go? I just want to find one of those directories that has a red arrow that says you are here. But nature doesn't have those directories and those arrows, and sometimes I felt lost, that feeling way out in nature too, kind of like the poem described actually. And I have this distinct memory of a day when I was very young. I'm gonna guess like 7 or 8 because I didn't know kind of where we were living, but at any rate, my father took our entire family on a hike. And we left our campsite and we started heading out into the Rocky Mountain forest surrounding us, and we hiked up one side of the mountain and we just kept going. And every rock and tree looked the same to me. You know, and I think we've been here before, Dad. You know, the day went on and we all got a bit tired, and I could kind of feel the tension rising between my parents because it seemed like my father had gotten us lost, all of us. And we crossed streams and we walked up and over boulders, and the sun began to kind of get long in the sky, and nothing looked familiar and everything looked the same. But somehow, some way, somehow, my father sensed something that was feeling right, and we kind of popped out of the woods near the lake where our camp was. It was such a relief, you know. And on that day, my dad modeled one way for me to cope with this feeling of being lost is just pretend that you're not. Right? Pretend that you're not. So all of those experiences, big and small, of being lost have prepared me, because sometimes I have felt that way just in my own life, just lost. Like I sort of know where I've been, I sort of know where I want to go, but I have no clue as to the direction I need to head in. Where, how should I move? It's that proverbial experience of feeling lost. And I think being lost is one of the biggest wisdom growing moments of life. Henry David Thoreau, who was an influence on Ernest Holmes, said this: "Not until we are lost do we begin to understand ourselves." So let me tell you about one of those times in my life, and maybe you'll understand what I mean. And the year was 2004, and I had just turned 40. You can do the math. So I'd recently accepted this promotion, and I was unexpectedly asked, or required actually, to move from Seattle to Dallas, where I knew no one. Again, I had done the same thing 4 years prior when I moved from Atlanta to Seattle, but this time it felt really, really different. It was within a few months of being in Dallas, I just felt completely lost. You know, nothing felt quite right. This new position at work was completely different than what I had been doing in my last one. It involved extensive travel, which was also new and unfamiliar to me. And my daughter was in a school where she was struggling because it was a bilingual school and she did not speak Spanish, and she was not happy. And when your child's not happy, that adds to that feeling of being lost. And I wasn't loving Dallas as a place to live in any way. Didn't like the climate, didn't like the vibe of the city, all the things. And shortly after moving there, my dear beloved grandmother died, and I was also in the middle of grieving, which can also layer on that feeling of lost. And I had left my CSL in Seattle and just really couldn't find one that was good in Dallas. So my spiritual support wasn't there either, and I just didn't feel comfortable in my own skin. I was just pretty lost. Can you relate to that, right? So every now and then, we can be sitting right in the middle of our own life and feel this internal feeling of being lost, and everything feels cloudy and vague, and nothing feels right and familiar, and there's this no definite path forward. But the very wisdom that guides us in the mountains, or being lost in an amusement park, or a hotel, or a shopping mall, or even in nature, can help us with that disorienting feeling of being lost in the bigger experience of life. That's what I want to talk about. So in the world of scouting, young people are taught an acronym for when they are lost. Let's see if the wisdom that the scouts learn can help us in our lesson today. The acronym is STOP. It stands for stop, think, observe, and plan. So let's break that down and see if it can help us. So if you're feeling lost, the first thing to do is stop. Sit down. Stay still. Stop moving. You know, so often it's our tendency to let our anxiety kind of push us into anything that keeps us from acknowledging how we are feeling. You know, sort of like my dad pretending that he wasn't lost and he just kept us moving along. When we often start circling and staying busy in avoidance, just trying everything we can to avoid that discomfort, we can just distract ourselves or numb ourselves, then maybe we won't feel that inner lost feeling, right? So when I was in Dallas, I was church shopping, I was online dating, I was working unbelievably long hours, just looking for something, someone, some activity to soothe myself. The wisdom here is to just stop doing all of that. Stand still exactly where you are and pause. Stop distracting and numbing enough to come to our senses. Just sit down and stop. You know, the first two words of our poem were stand still. Everything around you is not lost. So look around you and notice your environment. Stop and breathe. And once you have slowed down enough and stopped moving and creating more confusion, the second letter is T for think. The poem says, where you are now is called here. Think about that. You're exactly where you are for a reason, and if it doesn't make common sense, it makes spiritual sense. But you need some time to think about that. In this kind of moment, I want to think about where I've been and all the choices that led me to get to this place. Let me gather the knowledge and wisdom that I've gained up to this point in my journey. I want to think about the lessons I've learned and the places I've been and what led me to this place. I got to get my wits about me. I want to think back to the last time I felt centered and joyful, and what road led from that place of centered and joyful to this place of feeling lost. Spiritual practice would be to go within and listen to the inner wisdom, that still small voice of guidance that's always right there. That's why it's important to stop and get quiet so you can hear that inner voice and its whisper. You may want to journal and pray and maybe even get help in assessing where you have been and the wisdom that you have within you. The thinking step is so very important because it allows you to treat this now moment and this place as a wise stranger and spiritual teacher called here. The thinking steps give you time to remember the tools you have in your toolbox for times just like this. What spiritual practices have helped you get past these times you've had before? Who are the loving witnesses you can call to be with you in this moment? Always keep asking, what is here for me? Use your inner compass to remember your own personal true north. It doesn't look like anyone else's. Then the third letter is O for observe. Open your eyes and your heart and look around you. Observe the place where you currently are. As it said, it's called here. The poem says, no two branches are the same to raven, meaning everything around you is there for a reason. Observe and listen and drop into gratitude. Observation. When you look around, it's either going to take you into misery or gratitude. You get to decide. You get to choose. That was in your song. You get to choose. Make note of the helpers that may be within your sight. What are the signs that indicate where you really are? Look for the clues as to where you might need to go next. And always observe and note the blessings of your current situation. What beautiful things are mixed in with the confusing things. Observe all of it with the most open mind and compassionate gaze you can find for yourself. Get curious about this place. I remember some of the breakthroughs that occurred for me in Dallas when I stopped to observe. I eventually found a unity church to anchor in my spiritual teaching once I rose out of that disappointment that the CSL wasn't what I needed it to be, right? I met a friend to play tennis with and watch football games with and find great Tex-Mex food with once I stopped being miserable where I was. In other words, I let Dallas be where I was for as long as I was there. And once you get familiar with where you currently are, it is only then that you can move to that final letter, which is P for plan. First you've stopped and acknowledged where you are and sat down. Then you engaged your thinking mind as well as your observing heart. And now it's time to plan how to move forward. But this P part, it may be different than you're anticipating. First, you have to plan how to stay thriving exactly where you are. You got to stay alive where you are. Keep that energy flowing where you are. And then the spiritual planning process involves setting intentions. What are you looking for? We talked about that this morning. What are you wanting? What do you want next? You're considering a new chapter in your life. So what is it you intend to experience as you move into a new place? So you're always planning where you're headed. In other words, there's this old wise saying that makes so much sense. It says, you'll never leave where you are until you decide where you'd rather be. We talked about that this morning. I'm going to read that one again. You'll never leave where you are until you decide where you'd rather be. Get really clear on where you'd rather be. And then say, I deserve better. And the magic starts happening. My intention in Dallas was to deeply feel the word home again. And I've told this story many times, but what ended up happening is that my daughter's new cardiologist in Dallas felt like she needed immediate heart surgery, so she urgently referred us back to Kelsey's original cardiac surgeon back in Atlanta. So it's a long story, but we ended up having the perfect reason to ask my company to let me move back to Atlanta. And within a few months, we did just that and ended up living in Atlanta, the place where I felt the most home. for the next 12 years. So I wasn't lost in Dallas long because I took all those steps. And here's the deal. We all want to move from this confusing place into something that makes us feel more real, more alive, and for me, more home. And this whole summer, we've been asking for creative change in our lives. That's what we come to spirituality seeking, actually, is real and creative change in our lives. We want to feel more real and more alive and more connected. But sometimes on that path, we awake in that proverbial dark wood where the way seems truly lost and the path forward seems to have disappeared. It's kind of part of the process of getting real again. And if you can't see exactly where you're going, it means you're headed somewhere new and radical. And guess what? Self-doubt is naturally part of that journey. How could it be otherwise? So this teaching is important when we're feeling lost in the forest of life or lost on the streets of our own lives. You can't sleepwalk your way into destiny. You have to stop, think, observe, and plan. And as we enter into this final lesson of the summer and we begin to wrap this series of topics up, the video I'm going to send you tonight is of a delightful woman. You're going to love her. I don't even know her name, but she's awesome. And she's asked the question, are you having a midlife crisis? And her answer is that she's having a rebirth, not a midlife crisis. Goes on to share her experience and wisdom of feeling lost in various aspects of her life. I think you're going to enjoy what she shares. But the bottom line here is you're not lost ever. You're where you are. You're here. And the poem says, and here always has a gift for us if we are open to receive and if we're willing to acknowledge that we are here. Here's the secret. Don't judge yourself about where you are in life. Maybe you aren't living where you thought you would live. Maybe you are in your Dallas of your life, I don't know, or living how you thought you would be living at this age. We're really harsh on ourselves. Maybe things didn't go the way you thought they would go or have the results you expected them to have. Maybe you do feel a bit lost in life, and life is like that sometimes, but your soul has brought your human life to this point. And if you can stop and pay attention, if you can think clearly and gather to you the wisdom you have learned along the way, if you can observe with gratitude this moment you are currently living, then you can plan with intention the way forward. The most important thing to remember when you are feeling lost in life is to drop into self-love and self-care. It can be exhausting to be in a place that doesn't feel quite right, but wherever you are, you can stop struggling and nurture yourself. Know that you're not alone. You are not, in fact, lost, and that Spirit meets you in this moment exactly where you are. So I want to close with a quote from the teacher and scientist Masaru Emoto. He wrote, "If you feel lost, disappointed, hesitant, or weak, return to yourself, to who you are here and now, and when you get there, you will discover yourself like a lotus flower in full bloom, even in a muddy pond, beautiful and strong." Will you pray with me? Just take a deep breath in. And here is what I know. What I know is that no matter how anyone may be feeling, no one is lost. Everyone is exactly where they are, and that place is perfect. That place is perfectly for each one of us. And so I know in the days ahead that that feeling of lost gives way when we stop, when we get clear in our thinking, when we observe our life with gratitude and we set intentions for a way forward. I know that we are all blessed with that knowledge, and it becomes clearer as we move in the direction of the life that we so desire, to be more real, to be more alive. And so I give thanks for this room of people that are willing to look at life in an interesting and very cognizant and conscious way. And with that heart of gratitude, I let it go and I let it be.